She only knocked because the store was closed. That was the story she told herself anyway. A quiet evening, half a recipe in progress, and an empty sugar jar on the counter. She hesitated in the hallway longer than necessary before stepping next door, listening to the muffled sounds behind the door, music playing low, footsteps moving closer. He opened the door with a surprised smile, clearly not expecting company. She explained quickly, almost apologetically, why she was there. He laughed softly and stepped aside, letting her in without question. His apartment smelled like coffee and something warm, familiar. He handed her the sugar, but neither of them moved back toward the door right away. They talked. At first about nothing important, how thin the walls were, how unpredictable the building could be, how easy it was to live next to someone for months without ever really meeting them. She noticed how relaxed he was, how his attention didn't drift. He noticed how comfortable she seemed standing there, like she'd always belonged in that space. Minutes stretched. The conversation deepened naturally, touching on work, routines, the quiet loneliness that sometimes hides behind busy days. There was no flirtation at first, just understanding. But closeness has its own language. When she laughed, he smiled a second longer than necessary. When she stepped closer to hear him better, either of them stepped back. The moment didn't announce itself. It arrived gently. A pause. Eye contact held. A shared breath. He asked softly if she wanted to stay a bit longer. She nodded, surprising herself with how easy the answer felt. Later, back in her own kitchen, sugar forgotten on the counter, she realized how strange it was that something so simple, a knock on a door, a borrowed ingredient, could shift the shape of an ordinary evening. Nothing dramatic had happened. No promises were made. But something had changed. Some connections don't need a reason to begin. They just need an excuse. She didn't finish cooking that night. The pot stayed on the stove, heat turned off, the recipe forgotten somewhere between thoughts. Instead, she stood by her window for a moment, looking out at the quiet street below, replaying the ease of the conversation next door. It hadn't felt like flirting. It had felt like recognition. The next few days passed normally, but with a small shift. She noticed sounds in the hallway more. Footsteps. A door opening. Music through the wall. When they ran into each other by the elevator, they smiled in that shared way people do when they already know something others don't. They exchanged a few words, light and casual, but neither hurried away. One evening, he knocked this time. No excuse about sugar. Just a question, had the recipe worked out? She laughed and admitted it hadn't, inviting him in without thinking too much about it. The apartment felt different with him there. Less quiet. Less closed. They talked again, leaning against counters, sitting closer than before, the distance between them shrinking without announcement. The intimacy built slowly, through proximity and comfort rather than urgency. When he touched her hand, it was gentle, testing. She didn't pull away. She stepped closer. The kiss that followed was unhurried, full of warmth rather than intensity, as if they were confirming something they had already agreed on in silence. They stayed together that evening, talking, laughing, letting the connection settle naturally. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt hidden. When he left later, it wasn't with hesitation, it was with the understanding that this wasn't a one-time moment. Sometimes, relationships don't begin with grand gestures or clear intentions. Sometimes they begin with a borrowed ingredient, a shared wall, and the quiet realization that the right person was closer than you thought.